Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, I've probably already done one of these with the title of education. I know I haven't got that many yet, and there are a ton of words, but it's something that's come up recently, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. And it's something also I tweeted about yesterday. Today's the 23rd of December 2012. And I have to say, um, I tweeted about it yesterday, and I'm looking at people's responses. I don't feel like, well, even with this, where I have the chance to explain what I'm saying, and even if there was actually a conversation where I was talking to people directly, they could ask questions and we could go back and forth. I don't think you ever really fully have a meeting of the minds, so to speak. It's actually a problem. I've talked about this before, but for the most part, people have certain things in their mind. I always think about this. Your mind is this huge, high-dimensional space, and I've got somebody actually tweeting at me right now. That's why I keep looking at my watch. I'm gonna have to argue with them. But anyway, your mind is this large dimensional space, and speech, text, all of this kind of stuff, you're flattening all of that down to just a little trickle of spaghetti coming out. And somehow that goes out into the world, comes into somebody else's head, and it's got to recreate something. There's almost no chance. Like, even if you have exactly the same mental images of everything is exactly spot on. I don't think there's any way you can have the same stuff communicated from A to B in that way. And all of us have different sets of experience, different ideas, different definitions, even for the same words. If you, it's not just a matter of denotation and connotation for words. If you really tease it apart, even common words like education, if I say it, what it means to me is something very different than what it means to somebody else. Specifically, what I'm talking about here is university level education, college, and liberal arts education. So I've got people arguing with me. What I said was basically, actually, I'm going to even roll back a step further. I was watching somebody get endorsed by an organization I'm in, and she gave a speech, and in her speech, she said something. It wasn't like a central element of her speech, but it was something that I commented on because it irked me, and it's something that people take for granted, which was basically just that college is not for everyone. And she just kind of threw that out, there's trade school and all this stuff. And yes, it's true. College is not necessary for everyone. Neither, frankly, is writing. I mean, the ability to read and write is not necessary for a lot of jobs. You could probably get by as a welder just on pure verbal communication and never be able to read a word. Jesus Christ. I'm sorry. It's fucking annoying the shit out of me. I need to turn notifications off when I do this because it's annoying as hell. I'll tell you something. I've had several versions of the Apple Watch. Slight tangent. It's a thing, I'm sorry. I've had several versions of the Apple Watch. I don't really know why I keep getting them, other than it gives me the ability to just look at my wrist and then see the time and then immediately forget about it. But, there are certain nice things about it, but the worst thing about it is even when you have it silenced, every time you get a notification, you get a little tap on your wrist. And if you're in a meeting or you're talking with somebody, you get the tap, you look at you don't even mean to, but you just kind of glance at your wrist. It's like pulling out your phone constantly and just staring at it. But at least the phone, you're aware that you're doing it, whereas the tap on the wrist, like I'm sitting here doing this, and I can't help but look down there. It's obnoxious. It's really a problem. There are a lot of things that technology does that are frankly, and here is number 3 from this person. Holy fuck. So I almost just want to say, what the fuck, lady? But anyway, what I'm trying to get to, like, it's annoying the shit out of me. What I'm trying to get to here is, I think that college actually is for everyone. Everyone should learn how to read. I believe that. You know, now, okay, some people physically can't. It's true. Those are a very rare subset of people. But if you physically can't, like you just don't have the wetware to support reading, that's okay. There's nothing like inherently wrong with it. You can still have a fulfilled life, but if you have it and you don't develop that and you're not given the basis for it, you're robbed of something. Like something very real is being taken from you. This is one reason why universal ability, like universal education and literacy, is so important. Because if you can read, then even before the internet, you could go out and look at books. You could read things for yourself that used to be kind of hidden away and the domain of sort of priests and nobles who happened to be educated. You could go out and read the same material. You start getting the printing press. You can actually read stuff that once was, filtered through a few people. And as I said, when I'm talking, what you're getting is some kind of shadow of what I'm thinking. Imagine if there's a book over here and the author put their stuff into that book, and you're not only getting my shadow, you're getting my intentional shading of that, if you understand the difference of that. It's not just that I'm not going to interpret that. Holy fucking shit! It's like 15 tweets from the same person. I wouldn't comment on it if it wasn't so obnoxious. But if you are getting not only that distorted view from going through my mind, you're getting whatever I want to present it as. It's going to be bad. So this is an intrinsic problem of having gatekeepers for education as well. So in addition to this, and it's not just a matter, again, like you could learn how to weld. If you're a welder, much easier if you can actually read instructions and read, okay, these are the settings that you want to have for this TIG weld on this material with this filler rod, and these conditions and all of this kind of stuff. If you can read that, it's a hell of a lot easier than having to go to somebody. And even if you have somebody at your disposal, if you forget something and you can just glance at it, it's much easier than having to keep going back to your supervisor, asking about it, and then doing it. So reading helps in your job, no matter what your job is, I would argue. But much more than that, reading helps fulfill your life. It makes it richer. And it's not just a matter of like, you're going to go out and read every novel that's ever written, or even just like the sort of canon that somebody might consider necessary reading. Just being able to go out on the internet and read stuff, useful. Being able to pick up a textbook and read it is useful. And so I would say, I would extend this, and this is not even, the thing that's annoying about this is not a case that, it's not like I just thought of, oh, why don't we just do this? This is stuff that people have had for literally thousands of years. They've had these ideas, and they've been argued for successfully, and we've even implemented them. And yet now, you have to fight for it again. It's fucking annoying, actually. What I'm arguing for is not just formal education. Like I have, in undergrad, I took as many classes as I could. Would have loved to take more, honestly. And in retrospect, another year in undergrad probably wouldn't have killed me. In 4 years, I graduated with 2 degrees, like 170-ish, I think a little bit more than that, but hours of coursework. Could have gotten a 3rd degree if I stayed another semester. Not that I need the degrees, like the alphabet soup doesn't matter, but it's the information you're getting from that. And I understand there are a lot of people, and this is something that I've gotten in the pushback, a lot of people say, well, I can learn the same stuff in some other way. I can go out into the world, I can read stuff, I can find it on the internet, I can find videos like yours and listen to people. And yes, you can. I'm not denying that at all. Yes, you can pull a book and you can learn stuff from it. Slight tangent, but I've mentioned more than once, I'm learning how to fly. And in the process of this, one of the things that you have to do is take a written test. You could totally study all of the material you need for that written test without ever having any coursework, without ever having any guidance. You could go on the internet and find people who are telling you how to do the pre-flight check and how to, start the engine, how to taxi, how to communicate on the radio, all this stuff. You can find it. You can find it written in books. You can find tons of resources. And you can even say, when Orville and Wilbur started flying, they didn't have an instructor. They figured that shit out on their own. They even figured out how to do the controls. So not just what the operations should be, but what things you should be able to operate. They figured that shit out on their own. So yes, you can do it. There's an existence proof that you can do it. But the problem is, in doing all of that, you're reinventing the wheel. You're going through, and to some extent, yes, it's useful to work through and understand at least pieces of how do you get from the statement of a problem to a solution to it. Very useful. In physics, when you're taking almost any introductory level classes, you'll do things like the linear pendulum with a small deflection, the inclined plane, balls rolling on it. And when you do mechanics, probably at least a block sliding down it. You do mechanics, you start doing balls rolling down that plane or some other slope. Things like this. Objects moving under the influence of gravity. You can develop all of this, but even then, when you think about it, having somebody guide you and having them even ask the right questions, because you can set up, it's one of these things, if you go to Florence, there's the Galileo Museum, and in there, one of the really cool things, holy fucking shit, it's the same woman. One of the cool things, she's got a burr up her ass, I'm sorry. It's like, oh my God. Anyway, one of the cool things about it is you go there and you see these classical experiments that you've done in your introductory physics classes, and you'll see like, oh shit, this is actually where this thing came from. And yeah, you could figure out the inclined plane, or you could figure out the pendulum with a small deflection. But the problem is, we see these in the textbook and you think, oh, well, these are just simple problems. They're obvious. Everything is obvious once you know what to ask, what the question is, what the thing to set up is. But these are very special problems. You can very easily create something that becomes extremely complicated. And Jesus fuck, I've got a bunch of people going back and forth. It's actually annoying. I need to mute the thread. Anyway, getting back to what I'm saying, if you take that pendulum, same exact problem, the pendulum, and you pull the string out a little bit further and you let it get into the nonlinear regime, that problem goes from something that I can teach somebody without any calculus, although calculus makes it a lot easier, but you can teach somebody the linear pendulum very easily. A little bit of math, go through some stuff, you get some of the relationships, some of the laws that are there, and you can get something. But if you take it out further, the relationship between period and time and length and mass and all these things become very complicated. Part of the work was figuring out what the problems were that you could actually solve. Part of the work was figuring out that, oh, if I drop a mass over a certain distance, how fast is it going to accelerate? What's going to be the impact? How long is it going to take to get from here to the ground, and so on. And even just knowing which things to measure in these problems. If you measure the horizontal, now in the linear pendulum, kind of works out nicely. But if you measure, in the general case, the angle of the pendulum versus the horizontal position of the mass. Those two things, or you use some other coordinate system, those things can make the problem either very easy or extremely complicated. And it's impressive to me, actually, when you kind of see what these problems are and you realize it was kind of an awakening, because you go through the physics, if you go through undergrad, that's part of it, or high school physics as it is, you get to these level, you sort of understand these problems, at least at that level. And then you get past it and you kind of think about it more, and then you start realizing, oh, it's not just that those are simple problems that I could easily understand. The very problems themselves, the choice of things that people asked, the choice of variables that they give you, these things were not at all obvious. And if you don't have the right choice, the shit is complicated. Complicated. So what I'm getting to there is I could totally learn to fly. Like if I had no instructor, not even the manual, and you gave me a plane and you're like, Scott, learn to fly. I've seen people fly before. I know it's a thing that can be done. I know this machine can do it. And even if you gave me the checklist, I guess I could get the engine started probably. If you didn't give me the checklist, maybe I'd figure it out eventually. It's not that complicated, but certainly not obvious exactly what you do. And motherfucker, I got to tell you, anyway, goodbye Twitter. It's like, mute that shit. I apologize for being so distracted here. It's just like, it's annoying. It's nice to have something that people are talking about, but come on. The thing that annoys me about this specifically is that people are largely arguing things that I'm not saying. So one of the things that really bothers me about this idea, I'm going to try to get to it and cover some of this stuff and answer some of these things here. Not that I imagine that the people who are arguing there are going to watch this or listen to it, but just to satisfy myself. I'm putting it out there. One of the things that I would say here is it's not the degree, neither here nor there. Having the piece of paper that says, okay, you've done this, it's kind of nice, but it never has meant that much to me, which you might not understand or expect given that I have some alphabet soup after my name. And I'm not complaining about it. It's nice that I have a PhD. It's nice that I have a master's and, bachelor's of arts, bachelor's of science, and some other stuff. It's nice, but I don't feel like it means all that much. Those things. But what I do think is valuable is the broad liberal arts education. And in particular, and I understand, yes, you could read Plato, you could learn philosophy on your own, you could study all this stuff, you can be a complete autodidact. It's possible, certainly possible. But you're out exploring in the wilderness. And it's not just a two-dimensional wilderness, it's a very high-dimensional space. You're going to stumble around and you're guaranteed to get lost. I don't care how smart you are, I don't care how good your starting point is and your references. Without somebody guiding you who knows what the fuck they're doing and is, you're going to get lost. Now, you might slowly find your way and you might not be that lost, but you're probably going to get pretty lost. And it's super easy also on the internet, like anyone who wants to can put out a video like this. Do you know, honestly, do you know what my credentials are? And even if you do, what does that mean? What does it mean that I have a PhD in physics? How do you know? And I'm a guy who actually has this stuff. There are plenty of people, you go on YouTube, you can easily find people who have no qualifications like that, and they're saying things that are just insane and wrong. Whether they're doing it on purpose or they're genuinely, just confused about things, I don't know. But it's out there. It's very common. So people, what I'm going for specifically here is not college necessarily as it is today. just to answer this stuff. But it's what college should be, what university should be. You should be learning, even if you're a computer science major, even if you're going to be a plumber and you're going to, I don't need that stuff. Bullshit. And yes, it's true. You can have a very successful and fulfilled life without it. But you're going to have a much richer life. Not necessarily in terms of money, although surprisingly, I've learned a lot of things that are not core to any of the degrees that I have. And I'll tell you, almost everything I've used at some point professionally, and it's probably made me more money. But that's not why you should study it. The idea that everything is reduced to monetary value, it's disgusting, frankly. I don't know, I understand that it's kind of an organizing principle to align certain things, but it also is just fucked up. I mean, if you imagine like there's somebody who's just interested in messing around with wires and circuits, and then they figure out induction, and then, like 100 years later, you can get a Tesla, it's kind of actually worth it, I would say. That person just playing around with stuff, having time, having the resources to dabble, having the ability to go through these courses and learn the foundational stuff, know where we are now, to build from that and get to something more, it benefits everyone. It's not just making your life better. My life is better because somebody discovered that, a century ago or more, actually significantly more now. And you think about these things, people having free time, I hate reducing things to a selfish argument, but there are plenty of selfish arguments for giving people free time, giving people education, letting them explore things, letting them do stuff. And I say this a lot, but if you want to spend your free time just playing video games and doing stuff that I would consider to be kind of a waste of time, that's fine. And the reason that I think that's fine is partly because, it's your life and we're a wealthy nation. We have the resources, but also because, okay, you're doing that, but you're kind of squandering that opportunity. But letting you squander that opportunity is giving how many other people the same opportunity that they're not going to squander, that they're actually going to use. And again, whether there's any return on that at all, and there certainly will be, no doubt. But even if there wasn't, just the value that they get in terms of having a more fulfilled life is worth it. The value that we as a society get having people who know enough about philosophy, of, like just having philosophy of law, epistemology, a little bit of philosophy of science, understanding a little bit of history, and near history, like knowing about the Holocaust, knowing about World War II, knowing how World War I was precipitated and how that led to World War II. Lots of these things are informative, and they're very, like, some of the traps that people fell into are things that are obvious and easy to avoid if you know about them. But they're also things that you can totally imagine why people did them in the time, and if you don't understand why it's a bad idea, you might do it again. That's part of the problem. That's part of why knowing history is good. And I'm not saying you should memorize like 1066 Battle of Hastings or some arbitrary dates and names necessarily, but understanding the ebb and flow and going through and learning about that stuff is good. It's something that's important. Having a broad set of just individual biographies that you can go through, even at a superficial level, and understanding sort of how different people go through things, how different people approach problems, how they've succeeded and failed in the past. It's instructive. It's interesting too, but it's also, useful. It gives you, if you're making decisions, we're supposed to be a representative democracy. That means every citizen is voting for shit. And if you're voting for shit and you're not informed, or you're voting for people and you're not informed, you're going to make bad decisions. if your only information is coming from Uber telling you that the drivers really want Prop 22, even though it's actually literally fucking them over, you're gonna pass that shit. Thank you and fuck you, California. But you know, it's striking. Like, if you're not an informed citizenry, you cannot have a functioning democracy. If people don't know history, they don't know, and again, like philosophy, basic stuff, people always reduce this stuff to like, oh my fucking God. It's annoying. Anyway, people always reduce this stuff to, you know, like, oh, calculus. Never use calculus because you learn calculus and you hear people say this shit all the time. First off, if you're not using calculus in your life, and I'm not saying you're gonna, whatever, you're working at home and you're a lawyer, maybe you're not gonna use calculus every day, but I guarantee if you understand it, if you really own calculus, there will come a time in your life where knowing how to differentiate something or integrate something, or at least knowing that it can be done, will answer a question that otherwise you would not be able to answer, you'd have to guess at. And the thing is, if you don't know how to use a hammer, you don't know how to use a screwdriver, and you don't have these tools in your chest, you don't even know what you're not, like, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you're missing, you don't know what you can't do. So this is a thing that really bothers me. And I think it's something also, like, because we've made education so expensive, and because even at like the high school level, people, you know, STEM is a thing, STEAM is a thing. My education, I guess technically kind of on paper looks like it falls very much under STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. I've got a lot of all of those. If you look at that on paper, yeah. But the problem is you're missing philosophy of science. You're missing Native American religious traditions. You're missing women's studies. You're missing all of these other things that have nothing to do, directly at least, with my nominal degrees. And when you focus on those little things, and you're missing art and art history, architecture, all of these things, you focus narrowly on the stuff that seems to be, you know, the bullet points, like vocational training, then you miss so much. You famously, I hate to give this example because obviously Steve Jobs was very successful, dropped out of college. But even he went to a Stanford course on typography, I think it was Stanford, and that informed him greatly about WYSIWYG, typesetting, all this kind of stuff, made computers what they are today, in a very large part. Going through that kind of stuff, having that ability to do that stuff, gave us stuff that it may have come eventually, but it certainly would have been like a decade later, maybe longer. It would have been in a different form. It probably wouldn't have been as abundant. People would have kind of stumbled into it. We can get there a lot faster if you know, hey, there's this and this. And if you happen to know, one of the things I always, sort of an example that I like to give early on in a lot of classes that I would teach, in biology, in genetics, there was this thing where people would look at populations and they'd look at a genetic trait that was conveyed by a single gene, and it had a dominant and recessive form. So you have two copies of this, the dominant allele, the recessive allele, both of the dominant, both of the recessive. Those are the things you could have. And people would look in the population and see the statistics of what the distribution of these traits is. And this was, in terms of evolutionary biology and genetics, a very hard problem at one point in time. But then, and this story is probably a bit apocryphal, but I like it, and I think it's actually not that far from reality. Then some biologist is sitting at lunch, talks to a mathematician, explains this problem that's so hard, they can't figure it out. Open problem that a lot of people who were very smart in biology couldn't figure out. And the mathematician's like, that's just the quadratic equation. Like, anyone who has like an introductory math course would know this. And the biologist is like, holy fucking shit. Holy shit. You've just solved this amazing problem. We've got to write this paper in Nature. And, you read the paper, very short, kind of apologetic, and it ends up being a seminal work that gets us the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And it's literally just a squared plus 2ab plus b squared, is a plus b squared. It's something that somebody with a little bit more knowledge, a little extra tool in their belt, could have easily figured out. But because you have this balkanization of tools and understanding, and people were so focused on knowing the things that were obviously necessary for biology, they totally missed out on this thing that revolutionized the field. My PhD advisor came from solid state physics, and he was quite famous in the in biological, biophysics at a certain point. And his contribution there was basically just taking something that was well known in solid state and used constantly and applying that. I mean, he did other things, but this was like the thing for him. He applied that to soft physics and to biological physics, to like proteins and DNA and this kind of stuff. And actually came up with a lot of stuff because he took something from here and mixed it with something here. He took his chocolate and their peanut butter, mixed them together, and came up with something that was just much better than either individually. So, yes, you can learn all of these things without college, but it doesn't mean that you're going to do it as well as if you have an instructor. Yes, you could go to somebody, like you can find somebody who knows these things and get them to mentor you. But if I'm mentoring one person, and I'm not saying it's something that I do and I like try to do, but I can only mentor one person. Whereas I can have a lecture with, there's an upper limit that's practical, but you can certainly have a physical lecture with like 100 people and have a discussion with 100 people. And if you have a class with like 20 people, that's pretty easy. You can know everybody directly. You can actually talk with them. I talk about this a lot, but one thing, this is in some sense similar to a lecture, in the sense that I'm here talking. But one thing that's really missing is the conversation. And it's something that I don't think, you can kind of get it if you have like Zoom and I see the whole Brady Bunch picture of everybody in the class and I can kind of look at that. You can kind of get it, but it's not the same as being in the same physical space and seeing somebody who's bored over there, or seeing somebody over here who looks confused. Are they confused? Are they worried about what they're having for lunch? Are they bored because I'm talking about the same stuff over and over again? Or are they just lost and they don't even know where to grab onto a thread? So, I can actually see that and I can talk with them. Or I can ask, if I don't want to single somebody out, I can ask kind of the class, is everybody tracking this? And if somebody's brave enough to volunteer and explain, no, I missed something here, or yeah, we got this, I can adjust what I'm saying. Whereas here, in something like this, you could watch this a year from now or multiple years from now, and I can't adapt it to you. If I have a different mix of people watching it, or in my classroom, so to speak, then I don't have the same course that I would have. With this, it's just frozen in time, whereas with that, it's literally a conversation. This is something I think people miss a lot with, like, a lot of people dismiss, like, why is classroom education good? And I want to say, I am all about learning stuff on your own. I'm a huge autodidact. But I partly can do that because I've got this nice foundation. And even when I'm learning stuff on my own, going to get a primer from somebody who knows what they're talking about helps a lot. Learning how to fly was a lot easier because I had a flight instructor and I had ground school. And, I'm actually like a couple flights from getting my private pilot's license now because of that. If I was trying to do it on my own, yeah, you can do it. It's possible. People have done it. But it's much harder. You're taking what is already a hard problem and making it exponentially harder for no reason. Now, yes, I'll certainly say, if college costs a fuck ton of money, you're going into debt for it. Yeah, I understand, like, as things are now, it's not practical for a lot of people to get that broad liberal arts education that I'm talking about. That doesn't mean that it's not something we should strive for or that is good. It's something also where, like, a lot of people complain. They're like, oh, well, you're going to spend like years in college that you could be spending developing your trade. And yes, it's true. If you're going to learn how to weld and you're spending a few years in college studying philosophy and studying science and art history, poetry, whatever, you're doing this stuff, that's not helping you directly be a better welder, although it might help you weld with a little bit more style. Might help you make something that's a little more aesthetically pleasing, and potentially, if you took a class on metallurgy, you might understand more what's happening while you're welding and be able to weld better. But, if I understand, like, at a molecular level, kind of what's happening as this thing is getting heated, as things are diffusing together and crystallizing, if I'm heat treating something or annealing it, all of these kinds of things, that helps. That shit helps. But even if it doesn't help, that period of time is very enriching for the rest of your life. And also, somebody said this, but in this discussion, you should be able to, and this is another thing, like, education basically should be free. And by free, I mean, like, obviously the professors are getting paid, and they should be getting paid decently, but your tax money should be paying this stuff, not tuition, and especially not ridiculous tuition. When you do the math too, like, you look at how much tuition is, you divide it up on the basis of, like, how many classes is somebody taking, how much is each professor getting. And what the professor is getting from that is like this, and what the university is getting from that is like this. It's ridiculous to look at ASU based on their current numbers, and you see, like, there's a lot of money here on the table that's not going into the professor, university's taking. And I'm not saying, like, obviously having facilities that are nice costs something, but, there are some problems here. There's a lot of overhead and administration that doesn't need to be there, that's getting kind of in the way. And then you get also a lot of people, this will be, I think I'm going to have to wrap up because I've got a call coming up, but there's a thing called Lambda School. It's one of these startups. I get annoyed with startups, giant air quotes, venture-backed companies which have massive amounts of money. They're called startups. It's an interesting thing. They have massive amounts of money, and for the most part, like, a huge chunk of what they do is either try to get a monopoly position on something, like take over something completely so that they can, drive everybody else out of business, slurp up all the profits for themselves, all the revenue, and then they can raise their prices and they have no competitors, so they control the market. Pretty fucked up. Another thing that they do is take stuff like public education that should just be done on the taxpayer dime and can be done efficiently and in a way that answers to citizens, because if it's a public organization, we can vote for the people who run it, and we can also vote, if we were having a functional democracy or representative democracy, we can vote, like, this is going well, this is not going well. I'm informed about it correctly. I understand what the problem is because I, have this background. And when I'm saying this, everyone should have that fucking background and should be informed. And then you can say, okay, well, this person correctly identifies the problem and has a solution that I think will work, this person is blaming whatever. They're like, oh, we need to privatize this stuff. This privatization trap is such a horrible thing. This is why healthcare sucks so much. It's why education sucks so much here. And I'm not saying private industry is never good. There are uses for it. There are things which, I'm recording this on an iPhone. That iPhone probably wouldn't be as cool as it is if it wasn't for Apple, which is a for-profit company. But also, it wouldn't be as cool as it is if it didn't have Multitouch, which was a University of Delaware project and then became Fingerworks, which got acquired by Apple. So, and that's one little thing. I mean, you look at AT&T, did the transistor. You look at, high-scale semiconductor integration, all of these kinds of things. A lot of this is public research. A lot of it is stuff that was at one point in time didn't seem to have a direct, obvious application. You let that stuff stew for 50 years and you get an iPhone. So there's a good use for this combination of these things, but there are certain things which work really well under for-profit models, and then there are other things like education, like infrastructure, like utilities, especially natural monopolies, where if you have a power company, having a competitor, like how many people can pick between two power companies at their home? Sometimes you'll have like a common carrier kind of situation, and they'll have, like, you can still use it even though you're using the same wires. But generally speaking, you're kind of stuck. I have SRP, I can't go to APS, not that they're any better, but I can't look at the two, I can't, balance them across each other. I have Cox for internet, and I don't really have another option. I can get DSL, kind of, but it's not like even by the ideals of a free market, it's not something I can easily change. It's not something that you can just kind of fluidly, it's not like buying a cup of coffee. You have two vendors here and here. This one makes a better cup of coffee and it costs slightly more, but it's worth it. Or this one makes a cheaper cup of coffee and you don't care and you let the market decide. That's kind of the ideal that people present these things as. But in reality, almost nothing is like that, where if you're getting healthcare, you're not probably going to 20 surgical centers and picking the one that gives you the best price and the best care and all of this stuff. You just want your fucking wrist fixed. And, if you want internet or you want power, you don't have a lot of choices. And it's just practical for, like the amount of capital expenditure it takes to build that infrastructure, to do a lot of this stuff. You can't have a free market, and, at least it's not practical. So even the people that are like market fetishists have this delusion of what things are like that has nothing to do with the reality of the situation. Education, again, and this is one of my biggest criticisms of ASU, although it's not just specific to ASU, it's like, that's just the university that I know well. But they have this thing where it's like they're just horny to have startups and have all of this money stuff, and they want the free market kind of stuff. And you see they really push for things like patents and things like this that are kind of contrary to the nature and spirit of a university. And what I would say they do is actually kind of straddle these two worlds in a way that they do a terrible job of both. They don't operate well as a for-profit company because they're heavily, heavily subsidized by tuition and tax dollars. But they also don't operate well as a public institution because they're trying to do this other shit that drives them in a different way. And so they're not doing this well, they're not doing this well, they're not doing the education portion well, they're not doing the research portion well, they're not doing the commercialization portion well. They're doing a bunch of things and all of them suck. It's annoying. So anyway, all of that, I don't know that I really coalesced to what I wanted to say. I'm sure I'll come back to this topic because it's something that I care a lot about. But my general statement here is education, and I mean classroom education, and I mean like university kinds of stuff, is stuff that everybody can benefit from. everybody should have access to. And when I say access to, I don't mean in the sense that you have access to buying a yacht. I mean, if you are, whatever you do, you work at home, you are a welder, you're somebody who's an engineer or a doctor, whatever, you want to take a course on abstract expressionism, you should just be able to do it. And, you could ideally just do this through your life, take a course here or there every semester, and that's just kind of how things could go. And the person who pointed this out to me, she said that, like this is something that she would love to see happen. It's one of those things where like, I saw it and first I was like, yeah, that'd be fucking awesome. And then second, I was kind of thinking, well, shit, this is like just how it should be. Like once you see that, you're kind of, why the fuck are things not like that? Is essentially my conclusion. And yes, getting alphabet soup, getting the credentials, all of this kind of stuff, not the goal. It shouldn't be the goal. Worrying about ROI should not be there. And having a situation where rational people have to do these kinds of calculations, it's not the way things should be. Having a situation where people, even in high school and grade school and middle school, see education not as something to enrich people's lives and to make them better citizens, but is essentially just vocational training. Framing it that way, looking at it that way, thinking about it that way is sick, it is wrong. And even in the sense of doing vocational training, it is anti-productive, actively anti-productive. And certainly in the sense of making informed citizenry who can vote wisely, it's totally fucking things up. So with that, thank you for watching or listening. I apologize, I did one of these last week, and instead of the green screen, I did an experiment with the black screen, and holy shit, that was a mess. So I could just do audio only, but the video is just, I'm sure I could make it work, but I'm very underwhelmed, frankly, with how that came out. So even though this is not perfect, this is what it's going to be for a while, and I'm pretty happy with it. I like, I don't know, I like it. I find it aesthetically pleasing. I kind of enjoy the way it looks. I enjoy how it feels. I enjoy the setup. I've got a kind of system down for it. Until I've got something else that seems interesting, that's what I'm going to do. Thanks again. Happy holidays, whatever you happen to celebrate, if anything. Happy belated Hanukkah, and happy advanced Christmas and Kwanzaa and Boxing Day and whatever other things are here. New Year, all of that stuff. And with that, say Jen.